Today on Voices, comedic timing, balancing life. Contributing today is Christopher Corrado. He's the host of several comedy showcases and balances his life by being an insurance representative and an avid boxer. So we're going to have a great conversation today. Let's go. Today on Voices, we're going to be focusing on comedic timing, the balancing of life. And joining me today is Chris Corrado. I've known Chris for a couple of years now, and this guy is perfect for what the topic is. Chris, thank you for being here. No one can give a better introduction for themselves than themselves. So Chris, if you would, let the people know who you are.
Oh, okay. How you doing, Lou? Once again, thanks for asking me to come on. You know, we've definitely known each other a little while, and we met a few years back, like you said, in the fitness industry when you used to set up a table and, you know, we had good public relations, and that's continued. So, yeah, I mean, I do a lot of different things. You know, you would ask me to come on, talk about comedy, and then I'm also done some amateur boxing, and then also in the insurance business as far as life and long-term care. So that's what I do.
It's great specifically because of the things that you do. You do boxing, you do insurance, so you're in the sales world. So you do some corporate America, some physical things, and you also do the lighter side. So you actually have the three sort of levels of life covered, where you have the fitness, the social, and the serious. And I think that's where I wanted to have you on to talk about you specifically being a comedian. So in this moment, you host a comedy showcase. Is that right?
I have a few of them.
The first thing I want you to do is sort of tell me which comedic showcases you host and where they are, and then we'll talk about what got you into comedy.
So the main room I have that I've had for the longest is a place called Original Empire, which is a pizza place in Rock Hill, South Carolina, just over the border from the Charlotte area. And we just celebrated 4 years of comedy back in June. So that's a monthly showcase. We do the last Thursday of the month. That show starts at 10:30, except during football season, we push it an hour to push it to 11:30. That way it doesn't interfere with anyone watching the game. Then I got a show called Grape and Agave. That is in Ballantyne, North Carolina. And that one I took over from another guy. So it's been around a couple of years, and I've been doing it close to a year and a half. And that's always the first Thursday of the month. And that one is starts at 8 o'clock. Then we got one called Dioria's, which is in Fort Mill, South Carolina. That's literally right across the border from Charlotte. That one I just started back in December. We do every other month, and we usually do it about the middle of the month. We've done Fridays. We've done Saturday shows. That starts around 9:30. That's been pretty much how that's been working. And then I've had a couple, good bit of other rooms too. And then unfortunately, some of these places have closed down or they changed ownership. So, but I'm working on a new room that starts next month. That's at a place called Time Out in Rock Hill, South Carolina.
That's awesome. And it just shows sort of the entrepreneurial gene in you, but it also shows your ability to sort of connect to people on a very organic level. So with that, how did you get into comedy? Like, how did you know that's what you wanted to do?
I always like telling jokes, like those jokes you hear that you share at parties and whatnot. But I've always wanted to do like my own original stuff, stuff that I made up, and in hopes that it would be as good as the stuff you hear. And I just never really did it. And then I was with someone for 6.5 years, and the relationship ended. So I was like, wow, I got a lot of free time on my hands. I might as well just go start doing what I want to do. And that was back in March of 2010, and just never stopped since then.
And it's brilliant because I remember watching, I think it's either Eddie Murphy Raw or Delirious. I think it's Raw, where he was doing jokes in front of his family. He did a fart joke, and then that was sort of the intro into, him actually doing his stand-up. And so for you, do you remember your first time stepping on the stage to perform as a comedian? What was that like?
Absolutely. I remember it was at an open mic at a place called SK Net Cafe in Charlotte. It's not there anymore. But I met the host, and this guy a guy named Ryan. He was the first host I ever met, and he's the one who got me into hosting. And I'll never forget, there weren't that many people in there. And, we said Chris Corrado. I was excited. He said my name right. Because Corrado, sometimes people look at it and they just don't know how to say it. He introduced me to the stage, and then a bunch of people came in, and I don't know if I even remember most of my first. A lot of it kind of just blacked out.
It was something about it that was addictive that made you want to continue?
Yeah, because I did get some laughs. So I'm like, wow, this is great. I got to keep this going.
I think it's interesting, and you probably can speak to it really specifically, because obviously you've done a stand-up where you're actually just doing a set, and then you've done hosting, which means you come up in different intervals, if I'm sort of describing that correctly. So what's the difference between doing a stand-up set and hosting?
Well, usually with hosting, you still should definitely tell some jokes. But if you're not, when you're hosting, you shouldn't take up too much time, because it's about, getting the other comedians and getting them their time. So I try not to go past 10 minutes. I mean, sometimes I might only do like 5 minutes because I've just been going to this place and doing comedy so much. Let's just get the next guys on stage. And depending on the comedian, they could range anywhere from, themselves having a 7-minute set all the way to 45 minutes, just depending on their tenure and material. You got to be careful, because you don't want to put somebody up there for 15 minutes if they can't do 15 minutes. You know what I mean?
Right. And that actually leads me to the next question. Because you're the host, do you help find the comedians and choose the comedians that are coming up there? Because you have heavy responsibility of sort of managing the time of the show.
Yeah, a lot of these guys I've met throughout the years at open mics, but now it's at a point where I've become so well known. I have people reaching out to me for time. Like some guy in Los Angeles found me.
Wow.
Yeah, he just reached out to me on Facebook, said he was going to be in the area. I was like, well, and I booked him twice. He's been in the area twice, and I put him on 2 different shows. So he always has a home when he comes this way.
That sounds like that's just sort of a great way to build relationships in general. So from that, I've seen you do sets, and there's different types of who sort of are performers with props, and then there are ones who are just storytellers. You, as a comedian, what is your style? To be specific.
I like to do a lot of one-liners. I don't really tell too many stories. I like to just keep hitting them. You know what I mean? And just a lot of my comedy, if you wanted to know as far as content, a lot of it's just making fun of me and then, my previous relationships.
What would you describe your comedic profile as? Like, I mean, I would compare like Jerry Springer. I was watching comedians in cars getting coffee with Jerry Seinfeld. And Jerry Seinfeld had a show with Eddie Murphy, and they're very, very different comedians. And Eddie Murphy absolutely loved Jerry Seinfeld and vice versa, but their comedic styles are totally different. And then they asked like, hey, well, what did you think of Richard Pryor? And so for you, what would you say is your comedic profile?
Wow, that's tough, man. I honestly don't feel like I could even compare myself to any of those guys.
Well, no, but I mean, like, profile-wise, as far as, like, how you sort of, I think Jerry is sort of a guy, you look at Jerry and you're like, hey, man, I'd have a conversation with him. He'd say funny stuff. Whereas Eddie Murphy is sort of that outlandish, extroverted personality. And so they seem a little different.
I would definitely say I'm more extroverted.
Okay, cool. And so with that, like, you have a very diverse background as far as life goes, because you were a boxer, and I think you still do boxing, as well as you work in insurance sales. So you actually have a really serious side to life. How do you infuse those things into your comedy? And then second part to that question, after you tell me how you infuse them, tell me about those areas and how they influence your comedy. If you want to do the second part first, that's fine as well.
I try not to talk about my work in my comedy, really not. So I really don't make any jokes about my work in my stand-up. Boxing, I can't really say I make too many jokes about that. They're all kind of like separate,
So for your mind, how do you do the mentality for these things? So say, for instance, you wake up in the morning and you are Chris Corrado, insurance representative.
Get the suit on and go talk to people and just let them know why, the planning we have is important and how it could work for them. And I make a little, a little joke here and there, but still, try to stay professional just to lighten things up. You got to think insurance and conversations like that aren't exactly exciting, attractive topics. So you got to try to find a way to connect with people. And if a few jokes and, smiles and whatnot helps, you got to do that.
Yeah, well, and I feel like, just sort of having a side that seems more human and relatable probably helps you in insurance. So like the comedy probably helps you maybe close.
Especially when you meet people brand new, like they say cold calling and whatnot. You got to find a way to, convince people that, you don't know that well, that they should do some stuff with you, do some business with you.
That the comedic balance you have of talking to a room of people that you probably have never met before probably makes you a 5-star insurance.
That definitely helps, yes.
Just to look at the career in insurance, like when you have a tough room in comedy, there's a go-to or a manner that you take yourself to handle that. And in insurance, anything like that come about when you deal with maybe a tough client and you think, hey, man, well, I have a sort of a cold room. How do I handle this? Does that help you?
Sure. You just got to find a way to get somebody, to relate to you or, like you and trust you. That's just a big part. It's about developing a relationship with the people you're doing business with or joking with. Why should they like you?
Again, that just shows how you're able to balance. So in insurance, well, like what types of things do you sell? Because you said they're serious, so I want to make sure I understand what they are.
On the insurance side, it's life and long-term care.
So those are pretty heavy things where people have to sort of think long-term, have their ducks in a row.
Absolutely,
man. I think that's good because a lot of people may not think about those things, and to have someone who's personable probably makes it easier to have that conversation. So with fitness, you're a boxer and you finish working and you've done your insurance and you made the sales and you made the contacts you needed to make. So you leave and you want to go get a workout and you go box. So what happens to your mind? How does the mentality change for you?
I still keep my workouts. I still stay pretty serious in my workouts too, so I'm still kind of like in that serious mode that it's still time to work, just in a different kind of way.
And so for you, is it about personal internal competition, or is it about competition you're facing when you're in that
both
arena?
Yeah, it's both. It's definitely me wanting to be a better athlete, and at the same time wanting to say, hey, I want to go in there and fight with somebody and see what we could do.
Your day jobs and social things sound like they're great foundations for you to be a comedian, because you're understanding sometimes comedy is serious, right? And then sometimes you have to like get in there and be competitive and with yourself. And I think that allows you to have a pretty solid foundation for all three things to be successful.
Absolutely.
And I think this is an amazing thing because of just the way you've been able to sort of be a chameleon in your different environments. You're originally from New York and you are in the South now. Social wise, they're pretty starkly different. So how have you been able to take the New York state of mind, so to speak, and be successful in the South?
Just like with, the business side of things, it's just, knowing how to talk to people. I think, there's just certain ways you could say certain things to certain people, and other people that's not going to work on. So when you can figure out how you could talk to somebody or how they want to be treated, it doesn't really matter anymore where you're from.
And it's interesting because I'm also from New York, and one of the opinions that people have is that New Yorkers tend to be more sort of brusque and more straightforward than people in the South are. And so you found a way to find that balance. What was that process like for you? Was it difficult?
Yeah, because I came down here right after high school, and I really I didn't really want to move. I liked where I lived, but I thought it was a good idea to come try something different, and it helped that I had family in the area. That made a big difference. And then, I went to college down here, and, a lot of times people are interested or fascinated by somebody different. So it was in some ways, it was kind of easy to make friends.
And that actually leads me to sort of the next thing that you do. You see this guy interacting with people. You're like, yo, I would love to have sort of a beer with this person. You use social media very well. And one thing you specifically put out there is a political question of the day. And I find it interesting because your questions are absolutely nonpartisan. And I think that's great. And even your responses when people say things are nonpartisan. How do you manage those things? Because sometimes those comments are far on one side and far on the other side, and sometimes there's arguments, but you find a way to find a balance that still allow people to have a conversation.
Well, like I said, I went to school to be a journalist. That's what I studied when I went to Winthrop, which is college, within pretty much walking distance where I live. And I majored in mass communication with a concentration in journalism. And what they taught us is you're supposed to report the facts. So when I write my question, I look for a topic, and I find it on everything from very right-leaning to left-leaning. And then I just basically ask the question in a way like, hey, what do you think about this? Or do you think this is right? Do you think this makes sense? Is this somebody on one side just trying to play you, as opposed to me saying, oh, this is what I think? Because I'm not trying to alienate anybody. If anything, I want to bring people in. So that's how I try to form the questions in a way, just to get you to think about it, and then you could tell me your opinion. So then, when it comes to me responding to people, if they ask me a question, I try to just think about, okay, what's the right way that makes sense to say this, to where even if I take a side, I'm not going to sit there and degrade somebody because we have a difference of opinion. I don't think that's right.
I notice sometimes in comedy, more so now, a lot of comedians like to sort of delve into politics. And one person that came to mind when I see what you do with your political question of the day, and then I've seen sort of some of the videos you've posted on social media, the showcases you do, it reminds me a little bit of George Carlin, even though George Carlin leaned more one way than the other, but he was unafraid to sort of go at people directly about politics. And so what's your feeling about infusing comedy and politics?
I think it's totally fine. There's ways you can go about doing that to where, you're not going to necessarily offend anybody, and you could get everybody to laugh.
And the thing about it is I think comedians make people think. And I think when you do things like that, I feel like sometimes, hey, man, when I answer, I'm like, I might be giving him some material. I hope he kills with it. Do you use any of the material that you get, not like maybe direct quotes, but sort of the energy of the answers in your performance?
Very little. I can't say I really do much of that, no.
And that's fair enough, because the thing about it is sometimes some of the comments are a little hard both ways. What would you say is the most challenging part of putting those questions up there? Because there's some people who don't have an appetite to even ask the question, but you do it regularly. So what would you say was some of the challenges you have come into?
A lot of the challenges I've come into, or someone will say my question is leaning a certain way when I'm trying very hard not to do that. And then I remember when Obama was president, I could ask a question, and then people who didn't like him would make every question about Obama, and like, what, this has nothing to do with him. This is a totally different question. And now that happens now, with Trump, if I ask a question, they want to decide to insert him into it. I'm like, well, it was a question that had nothing to do with him whatsoever. But, a lot of people just want to bring it up.
Do you see any of those challenges when you, for the comedians, maybe you introduce, or even you when you're performing? Do you see those challenges happen as a comedian when maybe the comedian puts something out there and then it may be received wrong? And if they do receive that challenge, how do they overcome it, or how have you overcome those challenges to still have a successful interaction?
Well, sometimes you're not really going to overcome it, so it's best to just move on. A lot of times, and not just with any type of joke, what'll help, I've noticed with myself and other people, is if people don't laugh, you might say, oh, that was a lot. I thought that was going to go over a lot better. Or, man, that joke was funnier last night. And then you might get people to laugh, and that might be the best way to overcome it. If not, just move on. It fell flat. It didn't work. Just keep moving.
That's fair, man. And I think it takes a great deal of bravery to do what you do, to step out there and to sort of host the show. So what is your experience if you've had a show and you had a killer performance, and the people want the person to maybe come back and do an encore? I don't even know if that people do encores anymore. How do you normally handle something like that?
No, we definitely don't do encores, but if I felt like a comedian was a good fit the first time, and then I felt like they really crushed it, I'll bring them back another time, possibly sooner than later.
And for a comedian that maybe had a rough time, how do you kind of work with them? Do you console them? Do you give them some coaching tips? What do you
Yeah,
do for them?
absolutely. I might tell them, hey, I think you might want to work on a couple of things. These are some ideas that I have for you if you want to try them out. I think it'd be best to go back to some open mics, and maybe the next time we put you on a showcase, maybe we should cut your minutes back a little bit, because I think sometimes when you give people too much time, it doesn't. If anything, it makes it worse. Sometimes it's better to give them 7 minutes as opposed to say 10, because when you have too much time, you could start putting your foot in your mouth.
I can believe that. And the interesting thing, and you probably can attest to this, people don't realize how long 5 minutes is when you're just the only one talking. Like it's like an
Especially
eternity,
if it's
isn't
not going well.
it? That's absolutely true. And the thing that I think about is like, how do you even get started like that? Like, how do you figure out a show? So like for you, you've done shows, and obviously you host them. How do you actually like create a set of make dialogue or jokes, because people don't normally respond to you, so it's you talking and then sort of waiting for a response, I'm guessing, and then you continue on from sort of the response. Is
Yeah,
that right?
I try to go in with a game plan, but you also got to make sure that if it's not going well, you got backup plans.
It's amazing, because the thing about that is that I look at some of these legends and you never see them bomb, and I'm like, man, but you hear them talk about how they've bombed all the time. So with that, like, what would you say were some of your comedic influences before you went into the arena, and what your comedic influences are now?
This is from a movie, but it was still a comedy scene. Have you ever seen the movie Goodfellas? Do you remember the part with Joe
Yes.
Pesci, like, am I a clown? Am I here to amuse you? That scene.
Yeah, I love
That
Joe
that,
Pesci.
that was
Yes.
actually a very big influence of mine, because I liked the idea where he just sat there and just lit up. People just stopped and paid attention to him and just thought his story was so funny, because even though it was something that really happened, in the movie, the way he told it, it was like like Ray Liotta was trying to tell him that it was funny. The way he tells the story is funny. It makes it comical, and I've always wanted to be that guy that goes in the room and lights it up like that. So I'd have to say that was definitely a big influence. And then you mentioned,
And you know
no, I
what's?
was gonna say
Oh, go
Eddie
ahead.
Murphy Raw, definitely. George Carlin and Andrew Dice Clay too. Even though these guys got pretty nasty sometimes, and I've tried to tone my comedy down to be more PG, but in the beginning, I definitely wanted to be raw and dirty like them.
So how do you find a balance between that? Because the thing about it is that since social media is out there, and social media is basically unrated, X-rated, whatever rated you want to put it at. So people are exposed all the time. And so how do you find that balance between, sort of being real and sort of still being palatable?
Sometimes it's just changing words up. Like a word that might be offensive. There's got to be a word for it, for what you're trying to say, without saying something offensive, or not cursing as much. Sometimes cursing too much ends up hurting you more than it helps you. I've seen that. I've seen people do that themselves, just getting a curse storm to the point where it wasn't even funny anymore.
It kind of makes people sound like they're angry. And so with that, I've watched several comedy shows. Like when I used to drive long distances for insurance, which
Oh
you
yeah.
probably can relate to. I would get on uh, uh, Pandora, something like that, and I would just listen to comedy. And this is how I found out about comedians, which, I mean, whether they're funny or not is sort of irrelevant, but like Gabrielle Iglesias and Ralphie May, and a lot of these guys I'd never heard of, but then I would go see them. And so with that, I think about the stand-ups I've seen. What would you say is the best stand-up show you've seen, either like in person or just in your life, that you would say this is the pinnacle of a stand-up?
It's somebody who is not famous right now, but I think she will be. Her name is Jenn Snyder out of Columbia, South Carolina. She's somebody that I've seen shut crowds down. I've seen comics go up and tell like 3, 4 of them in a row, and just some fall flat, some barely make it, but she comes on and just totally takes over, and people are into her, and she's amazing. If she's gonna make it, she has to.
And I've seen that I think she's done some shows for you, right? Or you've hosted some shows with her,
I've
if I'm
booked
not
her so many
mistaken, right?
times now I forgot how many times.
Well, I'm hoping for success for her as well. And it actually leads me to a segue about a generalized opinion, maybe yours, maybe what you've heard about women in comedy. Because the funny thing about women is women in comedy sort of, I feel like sometimes have a different or are held to a different standard than men. And they have to be a certain way as opposed to men. What's your opinion about women in comedy? Because I can think of plenty of funny women in comedy, but as a host, what is your perception of the crowd and maybe from comics in
Well, I
general?
mean, if there's a show and there's like, 5 people on it and there's one girl, I think a lot of times people, because they see a woman up there, they might sometimes pay more attention because like, oh, okay, I saw a bunch of dudes, now I'm seeing a woman up there, so they might turn around and be like, we'll be more interested in it because she's the only woman. And I think sometimes women that I've noticed, they could, if they want to be dirty, a lot of times people tend to enjoy that more than when guys are dirty. Yeah, I mean,
Really?
sometimes when you hear a woman go say some pretty vile stuff, it's just different when you hear it from a woman. Apparently, that's how I've seen the crowds take it.
It's interesting because obviously there's a standard. I think it's maybe the shock value. That's what I think immediately is like sort of the shock
Absolutely.
value of a woman sort of being dirty. So with that, I mean, just sort of you talking about the process, how have you refined sort of yourself as a host and as a performer, as a specific, just you doing stand up and the process of comedy? Like what are some of the things you've done to refine yourself to become
So
better?
yeah, I think since most of the shows I do now are when I'm hosting, the shows that I produce and host. So like I said, if I've been there enough times, I more or less just try to get the crowd wound up with more like hellos, how you doing? Hey, where you from? Is this the first time you had a show? Just more interactive. Let's have a conversation as opposed to just going and telling jokes. Just trying to get people into it, and then just joking back and forth with them. More crowd work, more getting people engaged the way they're looking and they're into it. That way, when the comedians start coming up there, then they could just take over.
That says a lot about who you are as far as dealing with, hey, you sell insurance to people, so you have to know how to sort of do introductions and do segues into talking about serious things, and you have to be kind of the straight man. So with that, what would you say are the highs of being a comedian for you, at least, or maybe just in general?
Sometimes I get just as much enjoyment out of seeing one of the people I book have a good set where people just keep laughing. So I guess the highs would be, when you've put this really good lineup together and everyone does well, that's definitely the most important to me, when everybody can come on and have a good set. When you put together such a diverse lineup of people and people are just like, they don't know what to expect because you had one guy who was like this, and then this other guy comes up and he's totally different and everyone's doing well. That's the high.
It sounds like you're just sort of the community organizer, so to speak, as you're making sure everybody has the best time, which says that you being a host is probably right up the alley where you're supposed to be. And so with you hosting, not saying that you're not doing stand-up anymore, what would you say is the lifespan of the average comedian sort of you run into or that you know of? Because I feel like comedy is something where you probably could do that for a
Yeah,
while.
absolutely. It's not like so when you say average, you mean like as far as the age goes, or how much time they've been doing comedy for?
Like how long they've done it. I mean, I guess age could matter too. I mean, I never thought about it in that way, where like how old is someone when they normally start. But I was talking about like sort of the length of a career, so to speak.
Uh, a lot of the people I work with are people that, some have 6 months to, some people I've worked with have been doing it 25 years. And then,
Wow.
if we did what to talk about age, I've done comedy with people that aren't even 21 yet, all the way on into their 50s.
That means that you've come across like a spectrum of comedic
Oh, yeah.
topics that just sort of as a host, it's probably like there might be sort of levels of excitement that they might not even have.
Absolutely, yeah.
So with that, I think about this, and I think it's important to understand. Or what would you tell an aspiring comedian or performer to if they wanted to do it?
A lot of my advice usually is that it's going to be just like anything else in life. You know, what you put into it, what you're going to get out of it. You know, very cliche sounding, and that, you know, there are going to be times where you're going to not do well and you're going to want to quit. But if this is something you really like, you shouldn't give up. You should just keep going. And editing and going to open mics is so crucial in the beginning, because, you know, you got to learn how to write a joke to where, you know, you better get to the point quick. You know, either have one-liners, or if you're going to tell a story, you better be able to keep hitting them along the way till you get to the punchline, or else it's going to be really bad. And then, of course, you got to go to open mics and you got to practice.
So talking about open mics, I don't know if this happens to people. I've actually never seen it happen, but hecklers, I mean, I don't know how significant they are, but dealing with hecklers, how do you advise someone to deal with that? And like, what do you think normally is the motivation behind something?
Why somebody would heckle? Maybe they're envious they can't do what the other person is doing.
Fair enough. Yeah. And so how would you tell like a new comedian to deal with that? Because I'm sure that's scary, man.
You know, if you feel like you can, you know, say something about them and get other people to laugh, do it. If not, you know, just try to ignore them. Or if you feel like you just can't ignore them, like they're not going to stop, you know, make fun of yourself some more. Be like, yeah, and kind of, you know, go along with it. Be like, yeah, I do suck or whatever. And then something like that. That I've seen that work, you know, when you just start making fun of yourself, because it's kind of like B Rabbit in 8 Mile, you know, I'll just start making fun of myself then.
Speaking of that, because you talked a little bit about Joe Pesci too. Comedic, would you say there's a difference between comedic acting and sort of doing stand-up? Because I've seen some stand-up artists where they perform and they're sort of acting out something when they're doing their stand-up, and then I see people who just tell straight jokes. Is there a significant difference in that?
Well, definitely in a movie, opinion? You know, you could stop and keep starting until you get it right. On stage, there is no stopping. You just got to deal with it if it's not going well.
I feel like that's a different kind of comedy, because I've heard commentary specifically about some people who are funny as in movie funny, and then there's people who are stand-up funny, and sometimes those two paths don't cross. So I was curious, because you obviously get to deal with the stand-up people more directly on what you've seen. Do you know anyone who's crossed over and done any sort of comedic acting from stand-up?
You know what? I honestly, me personally, no, I don't think I know anybody who has. I know a comedian that did a commercial once, but it wasn't like a comedy commercial. It was just a commercial.
So how do people advertise for coming? Because I've seen your advertisement, and because I sort of know who you are, I trust your commentary on it. But how do you get a stranger interested in coming to check out comedy?
You just tell them what you do. You know, sometimes you just gotta say, hey, look, this is what I do. This is when it's gonna be. And I even have some comedy cards I pass out to people. Like, if you're interested, here's my email and, you know, my cell phone number. You know, you're interested in coming, come check it out, or like my Instagram, like my, you know, follow me on Instagram, or, you know, add me on Facebook. That way you can see when shows are coming up.
The way you handle yourself sort of in the social media platform creates a trust in when you say things. So with that, I think it's interesting, because we've talked about comedians and some comedic type things. Who would you put on the sort of Mount Rushmore of comedy? 3 or 4 comedians that you're like, man, these are probably the best people I've ever seen do it.
Well, we talked about him a couple of times already. Eddie Murphy. I mean, he was just his style. I mean, you know, I like the way he dresses. I always thought that was a really cool outfit in Raw. So, you know, he just had a really good style, and so I definitely have to say he's up there. And George Carlin, he was more. I think he's one of the best comedians that ever, you know, got you to think about things more. Like, you know, I'm not going to just tell jokes. I want you to think about this, you know, think about this serious thing that I'm going to be making a joke about. So I have to say he would definitely be up there. And then a third person, I don't know. Some of the newer guys I really like. I like Kevin Hart. I like Cat Williams. I think, you know, they're really, really good. I don't know if I'd put them up with, you know, Eddie Murphy or George Carlin just yet, but I definitely enjoy their stuff.
there's always a sort of another side to comedy where you make people laugh, and then when you're not in front of a crowd, then people sort of wonder, what do you do? And so we alluded to it a little bit, but I mean, what does Chris do for balance in his life? Because it sounds like I kind of understand on the work side, but what do you do for fun, for balance, just to sort of keep your juices going so you can have a balanced life as Chris?
Hanging out with family and friends, just sometimes just hanging out and, eating, having some drinks, that's cool. And sometimes I just like to be alone and watch a movie by myself and just, take my phone, put it in another room, and then just veg out in front of the TV.
You probably need the downtime because you spend so much time in front of people.
Yeah,
right?
sometimes it's good to just be alone.
I have two more questions for you, and then we're going to start wrapping up. Can you describe the energy or sort of fuel that you get from doing each one of the things you do and how they have positively impacted your life? Because we've talked about you being a boxer and an insurance man who helps people and a comedian. How have those things helped your life sort of be better?
Well, I mean, it definitely helping other people is, one of the most important things because, when you're helping someone with financial matters, you could see where these things really help people with their retirement or, God forbid, they pass on young or whenever they pass on, that there's a foundation there that will help their family and just, or if they, needed a skilled care one day and because they can't take care of themselves anymore, it's good to know that they have these systems in place to protect them in the short term and the long term. I think that's important to me, is helping people. And then comedy, another way of helping people, just people going out and having a good time and just getting some laughs. That just sit somewhere for a couple of hours and just not worry about anything but just laughing and having a good time. That to me is probably, seeing other people happy and taken care of is very important. Boxing might be a little bit different because when I'm fighting somebody, I want to win, so I don't really want that other person to be too happy because then that means I lost the fight. I really would like to win. So, so I guess that one I kind of want to do for me. And my coach.
Well, and I feel like, but I mean, if you think about your life, 2/3 of your life is dedicated to helping people have the best life experience, and the 1/3 is about you having the best life experience. I think that's a pretty fair fraction and balance to have.
Okay, yeah,
life.
well, that's cool.
And so with that, a last question here is, you've shown that obviously you have comedic timing because you are a comedian and you've elevated yourself to hosting because, in my opinion, when a person can host a comedy show, that means that the person who has selected the host knows comedy and they know they can command the venue with the comedy. So with that, how do people contact you and get to firsthand experience what Chris
Well, if
is doing?
anybody wants, is interested, like I said, I'm on social media. It's actually Christopher, and then my last name Corrado, which is CORRADO. You can find me on. I have a Twitter. I don't really use it very much though, but I'm more on Instagram and Facebook. You could find me there. Or if you just wanted to give me a call, man, that's fine too. My cell phone number is 803-984-5128. Or if you wanted to email me, it's my last name, which is Corrado, CORRADO 81 @gmail.com.
Because the podcast is called Voices, I do this so people can hear the voices of the people that I've interacted with. So I like to have the last voice, the last words of significance to come from the guest. So with that, is there anything that you want to leave the people with, either a quote or something you just have on your heart or your chest that you want to get out, or just anything that you want the people to remember about Chris?
For myself and for everyone listening, just go out there and be the best person you can. Do what makes you happy. Be good to other people. I think we live in a great country where, we got to look out for each other, and just sometimes just holding a door open for somebody or saying hello to somebody can make a big difference. Everyone has a shot every day to be nice to other people. And I think that's really what we need.
That's brilliant, man. I've enjoyed the conversation immensely, and I've learned quite a bit from you. So I look forward to future conversations, and I'll definitely be on your next political question of the day. So, Chris, I want to thank you for joining me, and until
Yeah,
next
Lou, I'm
time, right?
flattered you asked me to do this, so thank you.